state. And we begin here first as the seed germs, and as long as the seed is cultivated properly, and that's why there's a huge need for gardeners or people who understand husbandry or understand how to actually cultivate seeds in a reality and allow them to become to their maximum strength. Because what happens is that this creates a bridge of perpetual energy that connects us and our ancestors and all there is in the cosmos. And so this is very important because it actually gets us into exactly why we would need to maintain a connection with our higher self and actually eventually become our higher self. So today we're talking about the oversoul, but this knowledge that you're going to receive is going to actually let you learn how to separate, to decrease the separation between you and your oversoul, and also actually become that. So also remember that every time there's a penetration, there's also an imprint or an image that's also often referred to as a mark that does resonate the actual identity of the oversoul. And that's actually what symbolism is. Symbolism is the seed form or two-dimensional form of something that has the magnitude and power that, well, how can I put this? The magnitude and power is still in baby form and it's growing up, but still the seed possesses all of that magnitude and all of that power. So we're going to keep going here. And we're going to show here again this transition. And what this transition is about is actually in densities. So you start to see the connection, because the connection here is actually every single life form is filling a specific space in the continuum, meaning that the colors that we see on the spectrum, the density of life forms that we see on the spectrum, the variation of personalities that we see on the spectrum, the zodiacal signs that we see on the spectrum, all of this is spaced out to create a bridge between the oversouls and the seeds in order to create a continuum of perpetual energy. So this is the main purpose of the creation here on earth, is continue having that bridge, and also to allow us to remain connected to our energetic force. So now we begin to move into the deeper part of this, because obviously we have some very esoteric knowledge that we want to reveal today. And the first part of that is actually the world, or what I would refer to as the word and the world. Now we start to begin to see that these actual terms are very identical. In fact, the word is the same as the world except for adding an L. And in linguistics and etymology, you learn that the symbol of the L actually means in ancient languages the symbol of the god. So what's actually being said here is the supreme being can in fact create worlds through words. And as we go on, we'll start to see that words have, and tones and vibrations have everything to do with the creation of worlds. And we see that this whirl is actually the wave or the spiral and the frequency that emits as we speak tones and vibrations. So let's get a little bit deeper here just to give you some examples. We have here what many refer to as a mantra. Okay? And what mantras are seeds and emanations of created worlds. I'm going to let that soak in for just a minute. The tones that you hear in a mantra, and that's why there's always a purpose within the mantra to actually pronounce it correctly, because what they actually are is they're seeds to worlds. And when, let's say, you have 1,000-petal lotus, then you have 1,000-syllable mantra that must be said perfectly in order for that world to be realized. So the whole purpose of mantra is to actually bring the energy of a specific world. Now, of course, there's tons of mantras, just as there's tons of worlds, and each of the tones and the vibrations create unique variations in these worlds. So to prove that even more, you now come to a mandala, which is actually a visual representation of a mantra. And mandalas are often used, especially if you look into the Tibetan system, is they're used to create patterns that eventually become embedded within the consciousness. So that when the llama is doing the astral travel, then they're able to astral travel to a specific place. Also in the vision or also in the meditation, they're able to travel into a specific place. So a mandala then is a two-dimensional imprint of worlds. And again, they're memorized to promote astral travel into that world. So this is what you would see if you took a mandala and took it into a three-dimensional format. So this is known as a kingdom, and it's brought about through the chanting and the tones and the vibrations that are going across time. Now, I'll explain that. See, every time we say something, even though it may get less and less as far as audibly, it's still traveling because it will even move through walls. And when sound is moving through walls, then it gets smaller. So it comes out of the visual, it comes out of the audible spectrum of what we can hear, but it's still playing a sound. And that sound actually sounds like a ringing in your ear. That's actually not tinnitus. Generally, it's the presence of an energetic form. So these tones and vibrations, and that's why there's chanting going on across a continuum in order to create a bridge, meaning that ancient cultures chanted to connect to their ancestors that were doing that same chanting across another level of the timeline. And so this becomes another very important fact, that we actually connect to our ancestors even subconsciously and through meditation. And we can connect to those ancestors from thousands and thousands of years ago. So what does that mean? What that means is that the ability that we have to use our tones and vibrations, and not only our mental or frontal lobe projections, allow us to break what we would call time, the speed of light, and those kind of things that hinder what we would call the world from the living to the world from what we perceive as the dead, but which is really the afterlife, which takes place on another time frame. So it gets even deeper, though, with language, that when we start to really study language, we find that language and symbolism do run hand in hand. They never should be separated from one another. Languages are symbols. Mathematical expressions are symbols. So even in studying the symbols in math, like the division symbol, you find that there's one dot, another dot, and a line in the middle, and that means division. So what's being said is one dot is, let's say, the spiritual body, and then another dot is the other spiritual body, and then the line in the middle is the realm in which that separates those two spiritual bodies, and that brings up division. So as we said before, these lines that you see, and you'll see it in concentric circles, you'll see it in spirals, those lines that you see in between those areas are actually what separate one realm from another. And when utilizing another body, which could be your voice, which could be your astral projection, it could be another vehicle like your ran, which is an Egyptian term for your astral body, you can pierce through those membranes because they are like veils in between one dimension and another. So the sounds that we can emit and the thoughts that we have actually do that. But if you look at this chart, there's something even deeper to be revealed, and it's the connection between language and geology. Because what we'll find is that the first characters, and there's a book called The Passing of Rivers, or there's a language called The Passing of Rivers, and then there's another book that's called The Four Rivers of Life. And what this book starts to show is that the rivers on the earth are actually lined out to the constellations in the cosmos, and that the first languages were actually developed on those patterns. And in addition to that, the zodiac, as we know it, was actually used in order to create the language. The symbols within the stars that we call the zodiac are also used to create the symbols within language, in this case, Hebrew. And then when you put all of those languages together, or all those words together, then they create a specific symbol. In this case, the Magan star, which is very ancient. So now we're starting to see the connection within all of this. And I'm going to take a moment to recap so that way it all starts to really connect for you. So because sound is shape, is color, it means that every time we say something, we're literally creating a world. But the perfection in what we're saying determines whether that world comes into existence, whether that seed grows up to become a manifestation, or it becomes null and void, meaning it falls into the chasm of nothingness. And let's look at a good explanation of that here. What you'll see is you'll see, these are one of the more older charts of antiquity, that the language, and this is of course a priest, is to be pronounced a certain kind of way in order to activate the actual tone itself. And that's done by the palatial. It's done all the way down into the chest. And because the whole purpose here is that, see, in English, just really the top of the mouth is used, and then maybe a little bit above what we would call the Adam's apple is used, but very little of the guttural tones that you see in the ancient languages. And there's a reason for this, because when you have the ancient language, you're actually speaking all the way from down deep, and then the word goes up through your passages, which would be your chakra centers, and then comes out of your mouth in full manifestation, because you've now taken that word and you've pronounced it properly. So what you're seeing here is the diagram showing that where the words are actually pronounced and how that connects with the windpipe and how that actually connects with other parts of the body. So that way, when a word is pronounced, in order for it to fully manifest, then it must go through the chakra centers of the being. So this lets you know right away that you have this power of being able to bring something from what we would say is the subjective plane into the physical plane. So generally that's called from inception to conception. Inception is the idea or the thought of it, right? And then so that idea and that thought starts, and that's the inception. And then the conception is if you can actually birth it into a physical world. Now remember, the process of birthing something in from the astral to the physical means that the seed or the word not only must be pronounced properly, but it must be put into the space or the environment in which it needs to grow. And that's actually the whole part of why the elements became so important, because if you were trying to accomplish something specific, then you would go into the environment that promoted that vibration and tone and nourished it properly in order for it to come to manifestation. Now, of course, today this is called magic, but there actually was no use for languages beyond this purpose, meaning that there was actually no use for speaking verbally except for to create things. So many of the life forms and many of the things that we see here in the world today were created from using the tones and vibrations that the ancestors spoke. And these tones and vibrations have been existing throughout antiquity and even before time. So let's move a little bit further here, because now we see another diagram, because I know some may ask, well, what about English? Because we talked about Hebrew and how when Hebrew is connected together that it makes a two-dimensional symbol called a Megan star. When you take English, which is actually a cognate of Futhark rune stones, and you put all of that together along with even the numbers and certain key symbolism that's used in the reality, you actually get this symbol. And this is known as the monogram of English, because it contains every single pattern necessary to bring forth everything from the English language and the Futhark runes. In addition, when you study occultism, you find out that this is actually the diagram of the incarnated world that most are living in now, if they've taken on the English language in their mind and they don't have another variation such as their own imagination or their own ancestral tongue, etc., in order to allow them to realize that the world is much more than just this symbol. So these symbols actually become more or less embedded within our consciousness and then begin to unpack themselves. So symbols, once again, are encrypted expressions of vast states of thought. And why is that? It's because the origins of a symbol comes from the oversoul, and then it embeds itself, and then it's left to be unpacked. And that's what we're seeing within the diagrams that were shown. Obviously, again, this is a two-dimensional symbol of something that is yet to be unpacked. And then when it's unpacked, it comes out like this. And so what governs whether or not it can be unpacked is if it's put into the consciousness. This could be collective consciousness. This could be personal consciousness. If it's put into a collective or conscious environment in order for it to completely unfold itself. So that means that if a person doesn't believe this is true, they don't believe that their words have any power, they don't believe that there's any connection to the English language and spelling or spells and magic and all that kind of stuff, then it means that it never actually generally comes to fruition what they're attempting to manifest. But we also have learned with things like The Secret and those kind of systems that what you think about and what you focus on does indeed begin to manifest. But that's a light version and explanation of what's really going on. The next thing that we have to take a look at here is actually planetary geometry. And obviously I did a flat earth panel, so I'm not talking about just balls spinning around in the air. In fact, I revealed a little bit during that session that all celestial bodies, and I'll repeat that again, all celestial bodies are planets or stars, which are the spirits of the celestial bodies, but moving in the deep. Meaning that they're actually moving in the water of the ocean that surrounds Earth, which is pretty much infinite. And their orbits create these patterns, and these patterns are because their shapes, their tones, their vibrations, and their modes of thought. And this is how we've come to actually understand even the gods. And that's why the gods generally represent themselves under these symbolism. Now, there's been a big corruption between what gods are, because the word God actually means the Germanic god Gud. So in every tense, I'm going to use a term that makes it a little bit easier, which is supreme being. You are a supreme being. You are a cosmos within. And the images that I'm showing you are just small variations and portions of what you truly are. So if you look back into the Enlightenment era, you'll find that this knowledge was already known. In this diagram, you actually see somewhat of an explosion of the cosmic bodies that are embedded within the being. Here's a chart that makes it easier to understand. I'm going to hold on that for a while and then come back to it. But it just means that all of these celestial bodies, or what we call a cosmos, is inside of you. So this is why you can actually create with words of power, because indeed you are a supreme being and you have those tones and vibrations moving through you, and you have the environment in order to create things using those tones and vibrations. So the act of creation itself is something that can be done by any being that is aware of their power. And in fact, many people have children, so they're already witnessing their form of creation, of putting in their seed and allowing that seed to go into the womb, and then the womb beginning to manifest a baby version or a smaller version of the adult so that it grows up to emulate the adult. Now, our duty as parents then would be to keep growing to the stage of the oversoul, so that way our children see our growth and then also follow the route that we go and begin to grow up into their total and full potential, which is actually limitless.